What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed you and pushed you into the abyss? Ethan Carter had everything: a thriving family business, wealth, and a promising future. But in one devastating moment, he lost it all. His closest confidant, Logan Mitchell, the man he once considered a brother, stood over him with cold indifference as he sent him plummeting down a steep cliff. Logan believed Ethan was dead, but someone else had witnessed everything, and that someone wasn't human. Leon, Ethan's loyal German shepherd, had been by his side since the accident that left him in a wheelchair. The dog had seen it all: the heated argument, Logan's cruel smirk, and the moment his master was sent over the edge. The storm raged above, lightning splitting the night sky as Ethan tumbled, his scream lost in the howling wind. The impact was brutal. Rocks tore into his body as he crashed against the unforgiving terrain. Pain exploded through him, knocking the air from his lungs. The taste of blood filled his mouth. His vision blurred, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was the end. Above, Logan peered down from the cliff's edge, rain streaming down his face. He waited for movement. Nothing, just the relentless storm swallowing the evidence of his crime. What a shame, Logan muttered, shaking his head. Then, without another glance, he turned and disappeared into the night. Below, barely clinging to consciousness, Ethan fought to stay awake, his body screaming in agony. His fingers twitched, but he couldn't move. Cold seeped into his bones, his breath shallow and ragged. Then, through the deafening storm, he heard it, a bark. Leon. Through the rain and the jagged rocks, the dog made his way down the treacherous terrain. His golden black fur slicked against his body. His amber eyes locked onto Ethan, filled with unwavering loyalty and determination. Leon? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but the dog heard him. Leon whined, nudging Ethan's face with his nose, licking the blood from his cheek. He barked again, as if demanding his master to stay awake. Despite the pain, despite the darkness pulling him under, Ethan knew one thing: his best friend wasn't going to let him die tonight. Pain. That was the first thing Ethan Carter felt when he drifted back into consciousness. A deep, relentless agony that pulsed through every inch of his shattered body. His head throbbed, the coppery taste of blood filled his mouth, and his limbs felt like they had been set on fire. The rain pounded against his face, soaking his clothes, seeping into his wounds. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like an ominous drumbeat, but Ethan barely heard it. His breath came in ragged gasps. His mind fought to stay afloat in the crushing darkness. Then, a bark. It sliced through the storm, sharp and urgent. Ethan forced his heavy eyelids open. A shadow moved against the rain, weaving through the jagged rocks with desperate determination. Leon, the German shepherd, reached him in seconds, his golden black fur slick with rain, his chest rising and falling with exertion. His amber eyes locked onto Ethan, filled with panic and fierce loyalty. Leon whined, nudging his master's face with his nose, licking at the blood smeared across his cheek. Leon? Ethan's voice was barely a breath, weak and broken. Leon barked again, loud, commanding, "Wake up, stay with me." Ethan tried. He really did, but every attempt to move sent shockwaves of pain through his spine. His ribs screaming in protest. His muscles trembled from the effort. His fingers barely twitched in the mud. He was too weak, too broken. He wouldn't survive the night out here. Leon knew it too. His ears flicked, scanning the canyon for an escape, for anything that could help. Then he saw it, a narrow path leading up toward the ridge. Slick with rain but climbable. Leon's gaze snapped back to Ethan. He couldn't carry him, but he could drag him. The dog latched onto Ethan's jacket sleeve, clamping his strong jaws around the fabric. Then, with a grunt of effort, he pulled. Agony tore through Ethan's body, wrenching a strangled groan from his throat. His entire being begged him to stop, to give in, but Leon didn't let go. He growled low, tugging harder, refusing to leave him behind. Inch by inch, the dog pulled him across the uneven ground, his muscles straining with the weight. Mud caked Leon's paws. His breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, but he never faltered. Lightning flashed overhead, and that's when Leon saw it, a flicker of light in the distance. A house, a barn, a chance. His ears snapped forward. He released Ethan's sleeve and let out a powerful bark, loud, desperate, carrying over the storm. Then he ran. The dog's legs burned as he sprinted through the darkness, his paws pounding against the rain-soaked earth. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Ethan needed help, and Leon would bring it. Ethan lay motionless, his body trembling from exhaustion, his vision blurred, the edges of his consciousness slipping away. But he forced himself to hold on. Because somewhere, beyond the storm and shadows, Leon was running to save his life. The wind howled through the Texas countryside, whipping through the fields like a restless spirit. Rain lashed against Leon's fur as he tore through the night, his paws kicking up mud and gravel. He didn't stop. He didn't slow. Somewhere behind him, Ethan lay broken and bleeding, barely clinging to life. Leon's instinct screamed at him to turn back, to stay by his master's side, but he knew better. If he wanted to save Ethan, he had to find help. His nose twitched, picking up faint traces of smoke, hay, and horses through the downpour. A ranch. He pushed himself harder, his chest burning from the exertion. Then, lights. Up ahead, a large wooden house stood at the edge of the field, its porch light flickering through the storm. Beyond it, a barn loomed in the distance, the scent of damp wood and livestock thick in the air. Leon sprinted straight for the front door. Inside, Henry Dawson sat in his worn leather chair, sipping a late-night whiskey while his wife, Eleanor, knitted beside the fireplace. The storm rattled the windows, but after decades of Texas weather, they paid it no mind. Then came the barking, loud, desperate, insistent. Henry's head snapped up. "What the hell?" he muttered, pushing himself up from his chair. Eleanor frowned, setting her knitting aside. "Is that a dog?" The barking continued, relentless. Henry grabbed his rifle from the wall and moved toward the door. As soon as he cracked it open, Leon pushed his way inside, soaking wet and wild-eyed. "Jesus!" Henry exclaimed, stepping back. The German shepherd whined and lunged at his pant leg, tugging hard before releasing him to bark again. Eleanor stood, her hands covering her mouth. "That's Ethan Carter's dog." Henry's eyes widened. He knew Ethan, everyone in these parts did. And if his dog was here, looking like he'd been through hell, something was very, very wrong. Without hesitation, Henry grabbed his raincoat. "Eleanor, get blankets and the medical kit. I'm taking the horses." Leon didn't wait. He turned and bolted back into the storm, knowing they were following. Minutes later, Henry and his ranch hand, Jake Miller, thundered across the field on horseback, their lanterns cutting through the darkness. Leon ran ahead, his legs aching, but he would not stop. Finally, he reached the rocky ledge where Ethan had fallen. He barked furiously, circling the injured man as Henry and Jake leapt from their saddles. "Dear God," Henry murmured at the sight of Ethan, his body battered, his face pale, blood soaking his torn shirt. Jake crouched down, pressing 2 fingers to Ethan's throat. "He's alive," he said, but his voice was tight. "Barely." Henry turned to Leon, who sat at Ethan's side, chest heaving, eyes locked on them. "You did good, boy," Henry said grimly. "Now let's get him home before it's too late." Pain, a deep, relentless ache that pulsed through every inch of Ethan Carter's battered body. It came in waves, sharp, burning, unyielding. His ribs felt like they had been set on fire. His head throbbed with every weak beat of his heart, and his limbs were leaden, refusing to move. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was alive or trapped in some cruel limbo. Then, warmth. Not the icy rain, not the jagged rocks pressing into his skin, but real warmth. A crackling fire, the scent of burning wood, mixed with something softer, linen. Maybe, safe. Ethan forced his heavy eyelids open. The world blurred at first, a soft haze of flickering light and muted colors. Then, shapes sharpened, shadows shifted. A voice. "Welcome back to the living, son." Ethan blinked. A familiar face hovered above him. Henry Dawson, the old rancher, sat beside the bed, his sharp, weathered eyes filled with something between relief and caution. "Where?" Ethan's voice was barely a rasp, dry as sandpaper. Henry poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. "Dawson Ranch. You've been out for 2 days. Thought we were gonna lose you." 2 days? Ethan's pulse spiked. He tried to sit up, but the second he moved, pain exploded in his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. A strangled groan escaped him as his body refused to obey. Then, a wet nose pressed against his arm. Ethan turned his head. Leon, the German shepherd, sat beside him, tail thumping weakly against the wooden floor. His amber eyes locked onto Ethan's face with unwavering devotion. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He lifted a trembling hand, fingers threading through the damp fur behind Leon's ears. "You found help," Ethan murmured, voice raw with emotion. Leon whined softly, nudging Ethan's arm. "Of course I did. I wasn't going to let you die." Henry leaned forward, arms resting on his knees. "Not just him. We got to you just in time. But kid, you were hanging on by a thread. Couple more hours out there. And," he shook his head, "let's just say, you owe that dog your life." Ethan swallowed hard. He already knew that. But there was something more pressing. Something that burned hotter than the pain in his ribs. "Logan," he breathed. Henry's jaw tightened. "That snake is out there living like a king. Acting like he's grieving his dear friend Ethan Carter. Hell, the whole town thinks you're dead. He's got the press wrapped around his damn finger. Talking about how you struggled after the accident. Even through a memorial service." Ethan's blood ran hot. His fingers curled into a fist. "That bastard. What about the evidence?" Ethan rasped, forcing himself through the pain. "The files I sent my lawyer?" Henry's face darkened. "Gone. Someone broke into the lawyer's office the night you disappeared. Wiped his systems clean. Logan made sure there's nothing left to tie him to what he did." Ethan felt a cold rage settle into his bones. He had come so close. He had spent months piecing together every crime Logan had committed, every dollar he had stolen. He had sent proof to his lawyer, thinking it would be safe. He had underestimated just how far Logan would go. Ethan exhaled sharply. He refused to let this be the end of his story. "I need to go back," he said. Henry let out a rough laugh. "Yeah? And do what? Get yourself killed for real this time? You can barely sit up, let alone take on a man who already tried to finish you once." "I don't have a choice," Ethan growled, his jaw tightening. "He thinks I'm dead. That gives me an advantage. But I need proof. I need something he missed. Something to expose him before he cleans up every last trace." Henry studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "There might be a way," he admitted. Ethan's sharp gaze locked onto him. "What do you mean?" Henry leaned back in his chair. "Your old housekeeper, Margaret Collins. She worked for your family for over 30 years. If anyone knows where your father kept records, documents, hidden accounts, safes Logan might have overlooked, it's her. Last I heard, she's laying low, probably scared out of her damn mind. But if she's still alive, she could be our key to bringing that son of a bitch down." Ethan's breath hitched. Margaret. If Logan had silenced his lawyer, it wouldn't be long before he came for her too. His fists clenched against the blankets. "I need to find her." Henry ran a hand through his graying hair, then exhaled through his nose. "All right, kid, but we do this smart. No reckless moves, no charging in half dead. You get your strength back first." Ethan didn't argue. He knew he had to be patient. But inside, his fury burned hotter than ever. Logan Mitchell thought he had won. But Ethan Carter wasn't just going to survive. He was going to destroy him. The night was still, heavy with anticipation. Ethan Carter sat in the backseat of an old pickup truck, his body still aching but his mind razor sharp. This was it, the final move, the moment where Logan Mitchell's empire would crumble. Leon sat at his feet, silent but alert, his amber eyes fixed on the passing road. The dog had been with him through everything, the fall, the storm, the fight to survive. And now, they were heading back to the place where it all began. Back to Carter Estate. Henry Dawson gripped the wheel, his face set in grim determination. Next to him, Jake Miller checked the revolver in his lap. In the passenger seat, Margaret Collins sat rigid, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly. "I still can't believe you're alive," she whispered, glancing at Ethan. "Logan's got half the town convinced you threw yourself off that cliff." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then it's time to remind them who I am." Margaret reached into her coat and handed him a USB drive. "This is everything your father kept hidden, accounts, transactions, and proof of every deal Logan ever made. It's enough to bury him. Ethan closed his fingers around it. His pulse steady. Logan had stolen everything. His fortune, his company, his name, but he had left one loose end. Ethan Carter. Tonight, that mistake would cost him everything. Carter Estate loomed ahead, its grand structure bathed in golden light. The place that once belonged to Ethan's family now hosted his murderer. Logan was inside, celebrating his victory, drinking expensive scotch in the house he had stolen. He had no idea Ethan was coming. As the truck rolled to a stop near the gates, Ethan turned to Leon. "Stay close, buddy." The dog let out a low whine, understanding the weight of the moment. Margaret, Henry, and Jake stayed behind as Ethan stepped out into the cold night air. He didn't need an army. He was enough. He pushed open the doors of his estate and walked in. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter filled the room. Logan stood at the center, surrounded by business associates, his voice oozing confidence. "A tragedy, really," Logan said smoothly. "Ethan Carter was a brilliant man. But after the accident, he was never the same. It's heartbreaking, truly." The room fell into dead silence. Every head turned toward the entrance. Logan's glass froze in midair. His face paled, his fingers tightening around the crystal. He blinked once, twice, as if he was seeing a ghost. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but lethal. "Heartbreaking, huh?" He tilted his head. "I'd love to hear more about that." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Gasps, disbelief. Logan's guests stared at Ethan, bruised, scarred, very much alive. Logan recovered quickly. He forced a smirk, setting down his glass. "Ethan," he drawled, slow and deliberate, "you've been gone a long time." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, funny thing about attempted murder, it tends to slow a guy down." Logan's smile twitched. "Murder?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "I think you've been through a lot. Maybe you're confused." Ethan cut him off. "I'm not confused, Logan, but you should be scared." Logan's confidence faltered. For the first time, he looked afraid. Then, from the entrance, a new voice rang out. "This is Detective James Parker. Logan Mitchell, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." Logan froze. Behind Ethan, uniformed officers pushed their way in, guns drawn. Logan had nowhere to run. "No," Logan hissed, his calm mask finally cracking. His eyes darted to Ethan. "You set me up." Ethan smirked. "No, Logan, you set yourself up. I just made sure the world got a front row seat." A single USB drive had brought down an empire. Logan lunged, but before he could even take a step, Leon let out a thunderous snarl and lunged. His powerful jaws clamped around Logan's wrist, forcing him to his knees. He screamed, struggling against the dog's grip. The officers swarmed in, yanking him up, slamming cuffs onto his wrists. "Get him out of my house," Ethan said, his voice like steel. Logan thrashed, his once smooth demeanor shattered. His eyes burned with fury as they dragged him away. "This isn't over, Carter," he spat. "I'll come back for you." Ethan watched him, unshaken. "No, you won't." In the days that followed, the media exploded. Logan Mitchell exposed, the man who faked his death to take down his killer. Ethan Carter's name was on every headline, every news station, but he didn't care. He wasn't looking for fame. He had his home back, his life back, his justice. 1 week later, he stood outside Carter Estate, the Texas sun warm against his skin. Henry, Jake, and Margaret sat on the porch, sharing a bottle of whiskey. And at his feet, Leon lay sprawled, his tail thumping lazily against the wooden boards. Ethan crouched beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You did good, boy." Leon tilted his head, then licked Ethan's hand. Ethan glanced at his home, the place he nearly lost forever. He had been betrayed, beaten, left for dead, but he had survived. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere.